Good afternoon. This is April the 8th, 2014, and this is Athens Speakout, and I'm your temporary host today. I'll be throwing a few hardball questions at our usual moderator, Professor Emeritus Robert Whaley, political scientist, historian, and general gadfly of the city of Athens, keeping us all straight.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction.
This is, believe it or not, Athens Speakout, episode 311. So you've been on the air quite a while.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you've been our major guest. I've interviewed you more times. I don't know. It's either 33 or 43.
Well, it's getting there. I have the gray hair to prove it. Today's topic, we're going to continue on with our discussion of the Richard Nixon and the administration of that time. We're actually starting to move into the Watergate era, which, back in the early and mid-'70s was a huge topic for all those children out there who may not be aware of what a huge political scandal that it was, and how its ramifications are still being echoed through the halls of Congress today. So what I'd like to do is start out here with a few questions, and our topic is, how did the burglary of the Watergate Hotel lead to Nixon's impeachment in August 1974? And this is probably part one. This is a long topic. There's a lot of things and many, many personalities involved in this.
Well, I'd like to go back to an earlier question.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to review the situation of Richard Nixon as of January 1973, when he was inaugurated for his second term.
And how many states did he carry in that election?
He carried 49 states.
Out of 50.
Right.
So he was overwhelmingly elected at that time.
That's right. He got, well, McGovern was unpopular because he could not convince the majority of the American people that it was time to get out of Indochina.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Nixon then had a sudden fall because everybody thought that if Nixon won so handily, that he would also win in Indochina.
Correct.
And that was the big revelation. And the importance of that sudden fall is the role of the National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger, who concluded in October of '72, just before the election, a Paris peace treaty with Lee Ducteau, which nobody in the United States had ever heard of,
mm-hmm.
who was the foreign minister of the communist government in Hanoi. And they agreed secretly that there would be a ceasefire and the American troops would soon get out. Well, the American public were not paying any attention to that secret Paris deal. Mm-hmm. But experts in diplomatic history already got some newspaper coverage of that. And I had been following both Nixon and Henry Kissinger since the word go for over 20 years. Anyway, it was only a ceasefire. And it brought the American troops out. But the Vietnam combat in South Vietnam and in Laos and Cambodia continued another 2 years until April of '75, after Nixon was impeached. And so there was a lot of battles going on in Indochina, but the American people couldn't care less. Mm-hmm. Once the American boys were home, goodbye. That was a nightmare. So that was the sudden fate in Nixon's career.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the South Vietnamese puppet state that the United States had created under General Nguyen Van Thu, General Nguyen Van Thu did not trust Kissinger. he would not sign this ceasefire agreement. Originally, Kissinger had hoped to get both parties, both the Hanoi government and the Saigon government, to sign. Well, Nixon gave Win Van Tu morale, but after the election, in November of '72, Nixon wrote a private letter to General Van Tu saying, I'm going to back up Kissinger's peace agreement. You can keep the military equipment, but since you're technically sovereign in South Vietnam, from now on you're going to fight with your own troops and see if you can't hang on to South Vietnam. And Nixon, helped by a famous operation called Operation Linebacker 2 in December of '72, after the election, and the American planes bombed Hanoi and Haiphong, destroying the Hanoi government, at least temporarily, and giving Win Van Tu a couple of years maybe to see if he couldn't pull it out of the bag. So Nixon then endorsed Kissinger after the election and said the ceasefire is going to hold for the United States. And Tu then had an army bought and paid for by the American taxpayer of 800,000 men. And General Tu, see what you can do. Because I hope to hit Nixon didn't say anything about Watergate. He was just saying, "Oh, yeah, I'll be able to." Privately, he was hoping to parry that whole investigation. So we're still into Nixon's attitude right after the election, and it was Vice President General Ford who became president, who had to administer the final withdrawal of the protecting American Marines in Saigon after it was over.
So essentially, when Henry Kissinger concluded the secret agreement ceasefire with Lee Doc-To in Paris, it was really irrelevant whether or not the two governments signed on or not. The United States was going to do...
From Kissinger's point of view.
Yeah, they really didn't matter.
Right.
Okay.
But it still mattered to Nixon because
it did.
He assumed, falsely as it was, that Tu would be able to hang on with all of that American air power. And he did not know what would be the ultimate fate of this Watergate investigation, which was still on the back burner.
Right, right.
So anyway, the Americans lost 58,000 lives in that war, including the ones that they lost in the Ford administration. And it cost over $150 billion in 1973 dollars.
Yeah, that would be trillions today.
Yeah, that's right. It would be maybe, I don't know, 5, 10 times more. I'd have to look in the figures of what a dollar really meant. Right. We didn't have runaway inflation. We had a little bit of inflation, but not runaway. No. Nixon was keeping it down to 3.5%. And he was able to say to the working class, the economy is still good, and America's going to win, and George McGovern is unreliable.
Of course, we're not going to be producing arms and tanks and airplanes, so there's going to be layoffs there.
No, there'll be plenty of sales. Somebody is going to subsidize. The military-industrial complex carries on.
That's true, but...
There's always a war scare.
Well, when you have a war going on, you lose material, you know, so...
Yeah. The lives are beginning to be saved, but they were probably spending as much on aircraft and tanks because they were still sending stuff to the Middle East.
Well, I can tell you one little sidebar on that. Over in where I come from, MacArthur, the major employer in the entire county is an explosives company. Right. And during the 60s and 70s, they made explosives for the military. You know, they're making bombs and things.
I've heard of that. Austin Powder.
Austin Powder.
I actually went and visited them in 1972 when I was campaigning.
I see. Well, okay, so, but I do know after 1975, when the war wound down, layoffs started happening.
And they closed the plant when?
They didn't close the plant. They just simply laid off. They went from 500 people down to about 200.
Is there still 200 there?
There's still about 200, 250, yeah.
Okay, well, that's the difference between an active war and a passive neocon
Yeah.
war speculation in Syria
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
and Ukraine. No one knows what
That's gonna happen.
Obama will do.
Hate to think about it.
And the stocks go up and down according to the latest panic. Well, anyway,
So that would. So we've lost 58,000, and how many Vietnamese may have been killed? Over 1 million.
well, I gave those figures last time, but according to Nick Turse, I think I do have those figures. See if I have.
Well, I think they kind of count myself.
Yeah. Okay. Nick Turse wrote a tremendous exposure after the war, published 2 years ago, and he pointed out that they were actually. Well, everyone had heard of the My Lai massacre.
Sure.
That was known, and they killed, 40 people there. But Nick Turse claims that there were 2 million lost, and there were actually hundreds of My Lais
Yes.
performed by the CIA and the American Marines and Army, which were never reported
Sure.
in McNamara's phony statistics. Now, McNamara later had regrets and said, okay, I didn't know what I was doing. And I wish I'd never been into it.
That makes things all better.
Yeah. McNamara had a cause of a pang of conscience after the war and after he was out. He wrote. I forgot when he wrote his memoirs. It was about 5-10 years later, I think.
Oh yeah.
When he finally confessed. So anyway, there were 58,000, including accidents, but only 47,000 combat deaths. And I have here a chart which compares the Vietnam with all other wars, and that 47,000 from 1955, they go back to the Eisenhower administration to start counting, and go up to 75. Now, at the time, I thought Kennedy had lost the first casualty in 1961, but later, Turse had Pentagon Papers. And he went back and started to count the few advisors that Eisenhower lost and added those. And it's up to 47,434 military deaths, compared to 36,500 in the Korean War, more than Korea, 1950 to 55. Of course, World War II was the number one combat loss. From 1941 to 45, 4 years, the United States lost 592,000 men, Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. But there was a purpose to Franklin Roosevelt's war.
Right.
He knew that the enemy was Adolf Hitler, and it was General Tojo, and it was Benito Mussolini.
That's right.
And every American soldier knew we're marching, we're going to Rome, Berlin, and Tokyo. We know when the war is over.
Yeah.
The problem with Vietnam, those GIs stuck out in the quagmire. I had no idea. When is the end? They served 1 year, went back, they went over as hawks, they came back as doves. They said Nixon is lying, Johnson is lying. And Kissinger was able to withdraw secretly through a disguised retreat and told Nixon, well, you're going to have to get out of there because we're going to have to negotiate with Soviet Union for atomic weapons. We're going to have to negotiate with People's Republic of China. They will be a check on Soviet power. And Nixon goes to Beijing and recognizes the People's Republic of China.
Right.
Another shock.
Another. Only Nixon can go to China.
Yeah, only Nixon went to China. Well, anyway, to get back to the casualties then. The Civil War was 214,000, almost as much as the World War II. And if you go back, and of course Lincoln knew what the war was all about. He was going to preserve the Union, and secondly, if you're lucky, we'll free the slaves.
That's right.
And it turned out, since the North won, he could free the slaves.
Exactly.
So Nixon had a purpose. I mean, Lincoln had a purpose. And George Washington, of course, knew that he was fighting for the independence of the 13 colonies against the British Empire.
Right.
Now, he only had volunteers. And the American Revolutionary War only cost 4,435 lives. 1/3 of the colonists were pro-Republican. 1/3 were pro-Tory,
Uh-huh.
and another third were totally
Just
neutral.
didn't
We'll
care.
see who's the winner.
Yeah.
And when Washington defeated Cornwallis, I think I'm a patriot.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Bring
yeah.
out the flag.
Yeah.
I was always a patriot.
I always was, yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
But the hardline Tories fled to Canada.
Yeah.
They left Massachusetts and formed a new Massachusetts in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And the University of Toronto was modeled after Harvard.
I'll be darned.
And that was
There we are.
they stayed loyal to the British Empire.
Well, let me ask you this question.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I have anything more. Well, let me see if well, you asked the question.
Yeah,
Because I think I've finished.
So in brief, let's summarize Nixon's political
Yeah.
career from 1946 to 1973 to the height of his power.
Yeah, January 73.
Yes.
Well, Nixon began his political career in November 46, when the Republican Party swept both houses of Congress, disillusioned with Roosevelt's carrying out of the war for rather peculiar reasons. But in 1946, the Republicans won in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. And Nixon was elected from Los Angeles, which was then a white-collar business town.
Mm-hmm.
Nixon, after getting his law degree, served 2 years making money. And he was really, at that point, interested in making money from corporations. But in 1946, the Republicans won on a great slogan, for them, temporarily at least. The slogan was, Yalta, Communism and Corruption. And the Republicans blamed the New Deal for being soft on communism.
Mm-hmm.
And honest historians, since 1946, found it difficult to understand the complexities of the Second World War. And it's very difficult to teach people the moral and ethical lessons of history. They get wrapped up into the military campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And money seemed to be the major ambition of most people in November 46. The war was over.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to buy cars, they're going to
Yep.
buy refrigerators, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to cash in their war bonds,
Mm-hmm.
and abolish OPA, price control, and
Mm-hmm.
get back to old laissez-faire capitalism.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And making money seemed to be Nixon's secret ambition, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Always his ambition. But once in his office, he discovered that preaching the evils of communism could get him publicity throughout the nation. And FDR was blamed for betraying Poland at Yalta.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed to be plausible to those who didn't read history.
So the fact that there were 10 million Soviet troops and tanks in Poland didn't make any difference to these people,
To which people?
to the ones who thought, well, the Russians should leave. They should leave Poland. We at Yalta, where they seem to feel that all
Well,
the-
in 46,
yes,
what the American public didn't understand is the geography of the Soviet Union, the geography of Poland, or the history of Poland relative to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Adolf Hitler who invaded Poland in 1939 and conquered Warsaw and thought he was going to control Poland forever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1944, Stalin, in the counteroffensive with American Lend-Lease, comes back to Warsaw and reconquers Warsaw because he doesn't really care much about Poland other than it's going to be a satellite state.
Right.
And he's going to march all the way to Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
So Stalin's infantry and tanks got to Berlin, got to the bunker, and Churchill and Roosevelt was encouraging Stalin to do this
Yeah.
because they wanted to save American lives and
That's right.
British lives. Without Stalin's army, it's doubtful that Churchill and Roosevelt could have won World War II. It was the Soviets that sacrificed their blood. that was not going to be publicized in the United States.
No, no.
Especially from the point of view of American Poles,
No.
descendant from Polish ancestors back in the 1880s.
No.
Who said,
No,
yeah, Poland was betrayed by Roosevelt. So Roosevelt lost lots of Polish votes in Chicago and Detroit,
Right,
and
right.
throughout the. And then, of course, the Poles had a spill over to the Czechs, the Hungarians, all of Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Were all captive states.
Well, yes. If you have if you have the largest army in the world occupying it, and now you're saying, well, what do we do to make them leave? Well, what are your options? You don't have any options. I mean, let's just be realistic here.
Yeah.
The United States, Britain, France, reconstituted army, we could probably match the Russians, but was there any stomach in the American public?
None, except for Patton, a crazy guy.
Well, yeah.
Right.
All right, now let's fight the Russians. Now let's go to war against the Soviet. Yeah, okay. Yes, we have atomic bombs.
Yeah.
Okay, but do you have any idea what those things are going to do?
Yeah, no,
I mean,
no
they
idea.
don't. They had no idea.
No idea.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
So-
they weren't talking about nuclears either. That was just, that was used against Japan.
Yeah.
So.
But if Germany had held out, say, until December of
well, that's
45,
speculation.
it's
Would have-
speculation.
Would have.
Right.
Might have.
Right.
If.
Right.
You know my famous slogan on that. A poet back in England in 1670. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride.
Oh yeah.
If watches were turnips, I'd have a turnip on my side.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're right. It's interesting to speculate, but
It's good. It's good to speculate on
yeah.
TV.
But usually in a war, if you have a weapon in the arsenal, you're going to use it. That seems to be the way it's going to work.
well, that was Truman's dilemma with Japan.
Right.
And Roosevelt and Stimson and Los Alamos and Oppenheimer had already made the bomb. They were motivated by getting that bomb before the Germans, and they won.
Yeah.
The atomic bomb beat the so-called hydrogen bomb, which the Germans were working on in Norway with heavy water.
Right.
But the Americans had the capital to spare, and Hitler had to use every bit of capital for his tanks and aircraft just to survive.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they couldn't invest the money in that.
Right.
In any case,
So we got Nixon here in 1946, and he's capitalizing on this. He's getting headlines.
he's capitalizing
He's
on
getting radio.
anti-communism.
Anti-communism.
Right,
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
that's Nixon's thing.
Yeah,
And
there's
he doesn't want to talk about the details of Poland. It's
Well,
just
no,
Poland
no.
was betrayed.
That's
That's
right,
all.
yeah.
And Russia was betrayed. Let's not look at Russia.
right.
Yeah, you know, it's just an evil empire as far
There we
as
are, yeah.
Nixon is concerned. Well, let me see if I want to say anything more about his political career. Well, when he got elected, he got on the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Lucky him.
Reactionary Republicans, a few conservative Democrats who knew nothing about foreign affairs,
Nope.
but investigated American Popular Front, Pinkos, closet communists like Alger Hiss that were part of the betrayal.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then they could point out that Alger Hiss, for some strange reason, was at Yalta. Link that name up.
Yeah.
What was Hiss doing at? He was probably telling Roosevelt to sell out Poland. Well, it was all a lie.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But it sold newspapers.
That certainly did. Yeah. And then you had screenwriters in Hollywood. They were.
They were part of the Hollywood 10, and
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart had made Popular Front movies, and they were fighting for the Democrats in the Spanish Republic,
Yeah.
which was a coalition of liberals and socialists.
Right.
So that's how I got into the Spanish Civil War. I myself was too young for the Spanish Civil War. But in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, I knew somehow or other Truman was bungling in Korea. Why did a war break out only 5 years after peace?
Yeah.
And what happened? What happened? What was? How could? Because I knew all about the Chinese Sino-Japanese War of '37, when Japan was the bad guys and China was the good guys.
You're right.
And Chiang Kai-shek's collapse in 1949 stimulated Nixon's career.
Oh, sure.
It was now.
Now we've lost China.
Yeah,
who lost?
Yeah, it was the
Who
Democrats.
lost
It was the
China?
New Deal.
Yeah, you lost China.
Yeah. So
Let's see, who was in Congress at that time? It was the Republicans. Oh, yeah, that's right.
well, they had no say on that.
Oh, no. I mean, the Senate
but
has no power.
Roosevelt did have a problem with Chinese politics, which he couldn't resolve. But anyway, Hiss got involved with Whittaker Chambers.
Uh-huh.
And Hiss was hiding something, and Whittaker Chambers had become a communist in 1923, when it looked like there would be another world war in Germany. And he was a writer by profession. And the Communist Party said, well, you don't go to the public meetings. You become a secret communist because you're too smart to be a proletarian working class agitator. So Alger Hiss then, Chambers, we're talking about Chambers. Chambers was a communist, and he met Alger Hiss because Alger Hiss was probably a communist, but it's never been proven.
That's right.
But it was proven that he knew Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss and Chambers knew each other.
Right.
And according to Chambers had a pang of conscience in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. And he went to the State Department's Internal Security to an Assistant Secretary of State by the name of Adolph Burley. And he said, I want to say that I was once a communist. I'm over that now. But I'm going to confess in case I'm ever exposed, because the United States is now allied to the Soviet Union, and after the war, there's going to be some flack. So here is my vita.
Yeah.
And Burley says, well, for the sake of the war and this Churchill-Stalin American war against Hitler, we'll just keep this in file, in dead file. We're never going to hear of this. So Chambers works for Time magazine and is putting out Popular Front, wartime propaganda. And,
Right.
Uncle Joe is Uncle Joe, and
That's right.
we're going to win the war, and everything's going to be okay.
Yep,
And
exactly.
nobody's ever going to expose me. Well, Alger Hiss was either a communist or he was a Popular Front New Dealer, because he gets a job in 1933 for the New Dealer, and he works for the Agricultural Department.
Right.
And then he gets into the State Department in 1938. And he gets a job on the Far Eastern desk. And he works for Stanley Hornbeck, a conservative old-line bureaucrat who worked for the State Department for 30 years. And they were supporting Chiang Kai-shek's war against the Japanese. But Chiang was losing.
Yeah.
So according to Chambers, boy, we're at half time already.
Oh.
Well, anyway, just finish up this thing quickly. According to Chambers, he got Hiss to take files out of State Department. He would type them and deliver them to the Soviet embassy, the consul in New York, and he was a carrier.
Ah,
And it was Hiss who was a spy.
I see.
Hiss denied he ever knew Chambers.
Right.
But Nixon proved that Hiss was lying and Chambers was telling the truth.
At least
And-
that they knew each other.
And then Hiss went to jail
That's right.
for the Supreme Court thing for 5 years, not for being a spy, not for being a communist, but for perjury.
Yeah.
And his name was Mudd. And then, of course, the New Deal was tarred with this
Sure.
because Atchison had given him testimony. All the people in State Department said he was a great loyal bureaucrat, and they knew nothing about this secret spy. They said, well, that's the end of the Chambers case.
Okay, well,
and the
let's,
Hiss case. So I guess we're going to be finished about Hiss. We want to get into another question at this point?
Well, let's take a station break here.
Okay.
This is Athens Speakout. I'm
Right.
the temporary host, Jeff Risner. I'm interviewing our formal host, Dr. Robert Whaley.
Right.
And so,
Do we want to say anything about Nixon as vice president to Eisenhower and how he became the nominee for the vice president through
Well,
anti-communism?
I'll leave that up to you if you think it's pertinent to this.
Well, you know, Hiss got, Eisenhower got it. No, forget about Hiss.
Yeah.
Hiss is dead issue.
Yeah, that's over with.
That comes with senility. But anyway, Eisenhower and Nixon then, Nixon was able to escalate and parley and expand on his anti-communist reputation and got elected to the California Senate in 1950 on anti-communism. And in 1952, he made an ideal vice presidential candidate because California was now #1 in the nation for electoral votes.
Yep.
So Eisenhower was going to win the nomination with Earl Warren as his vice president and Nixon as senator, and he'd get the California delegation and New York delegation, and he would get the nomination through typical politics.
Right.
And he only had to defeat Taft from Ohio to do that. So California and Nixon and Warren helped put Eisenhower over the top.
Right.
So Nixon becomes vice president. But the New York Times was on the left and always disliked Nixon. And during that campaign, they did a little investigation in Los Angeles and said, well, you know, Nixon has a secret fund, a Schluss fund of $10,000, and he is too corrupt to be vice president. Why don't we get him, why don't we get Eisenhower and Dewey to dump him from the ticket? Well, Eisenhower was caught in a dilemma because Eisenhower wanted to sympathize with the New Deal and get Democratic votes, and he wanted peace with the Soviet Union. He did not believe in Patton's war and so forth and so on. And the Korean War had broken out, and Eisenhower was preaching Truman's ceasefire on Korea, and if he got elected, he would bring peace in Korea,
Right.
which required a compromise with Red China and with North Korea. Well, Nixon was not too sure what he wanted to do about Korea. So anyway, the thing was a Chequers speech.
Oh, yes.
So Nixon convinced Eisenhower to allow him a half-hour TV time to explain where this secret fund came from, and he would stay on the ticket.
Yeah.
So I saw this on television later. I didn't see it at the time, but anyway, later it was rebroadcast. And Nixon then gives a demagogic speech in which he doesn't explain the secret fund at all.
No.
But he changes the subject.
Yes.
Typical diplomatic thing. And he uses an old joke of Roosevelt. Because when Roosevelt was popular back in the 1940s, he campaigned against the Republicans in the fireside speech.
That's right.
And he gave a speech which went like this. The Republicans hate me, and the Republicans hate my wife, Eleanor, and they even hate my little dog, Fowler.
Yeah.
Oh, that was popular. Everybody cheered. And they sent letters in, we want Roosevelt, we want Roosevelt. And Nixon pulls that speech out. And he said, well, Truman has a corrupt guy by the name of Vaughan, and Vaughan gives fur coats to his mafia people, and he gives them freezers and so forth and so on. And my wife can only afford, Pat can only afford a cloth coat.
Yeah.
And I have a little dog, Chequers, and end of the speech.
Yeah, that's it.
Send your letters. If you want me to stay in your, send Eisenhower letters. Keep me on the ticket.
Yeah.
Well, the letters kind of baffled Eisenhower. Eisenhower said, okay, Tricky
whatever.
Dick, you're going to stay, but I really don't trust you privately, but we need votes.
Yeah.
You're on the ticket.
Yeah.
So that became, the Chequers speech comes out in 72, or 73, when the Democratic press wanted to get rid of Nixon. He was now Tricky Dick, and they got that title from that Chequers speech. So I guess I did want to get that on. So anyway, Eisenhower was elected. Nixon was vice president.
I think it also showed Nixon something at that time, that the power that television had in molding public opinion.
Right, right.
Even though it's ironic, he was sort of done in by TV, but he certainly knew how to use it.
Well, I'm not too sure what you're referring to when he got done in. How did he get done in by television?
Done in by just Nixon was probably, if you look at the number of speeches that he made on television, the most used television the most of any president we've ever had.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
He was a master at it.
Oh, he was. Okay. And he knew it was a good form of advertising.
Right.
Well, okay, so he put lots and lots and lots of speeches and words on the record. Now they're videotaped.
Right.
Now they can be replayed.
Right.
He did not quite understand the technology was that once something is done electronically, it's there forever.
Right.
And those words that he would use, such as, well, of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves there. We're actually getting the Watergate scandal. But
I wanted to get Nixon's career.
Yeah,
He did use television.
Oh,
and
he used it quite a bit. But what his enemies realized was that we could use the same thing against him. So that's when you had the major TV networks like Cronkite.
Oh, Cronkite, yeah.
Coming on and say, well, we're going to do an entire 1-hour special about the entire Watergate scandal.
Oh, Watergate.
Yeah. So
After Watergate,
right,
yeah.
No, this is during Watergate.
Okay, after January 73.
After January 73, when they started to say, well, something is really wrong here.
Yeah.
Then they started having reporters go out and dig, and then they started making programs.
Right.
And now you're seeing it in prime
Right.
time, and
Right.
it's on constantly, continuously.
Right.
And then, which I think was the most brilliant thing of all, was the daytime Senate and House hearings.
Yeah.
All on television.
Good.
Never done before. Now
Yeah.
they had done them on film, like
Right.
the Kiehofer.
Estes Kiefer.
When he did the mafia
Right.
things, that was all done on film,
Right.
and it was showed in theaters.
Right.
Okay, and there was some radio. But now, you couldn't watch your daytime soaps without seeing Sam
Right.
Irvin up there reciting
Right.
Shakespeare
Right.
and making John Dean sweat.
Yeah.
So that, even though he was a master of TV, in a sense, it was his own. It became the tool that undid him.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
anyway,
I was
my
looking
point.
at this from the past.
Yes.
You're looking at it from today backwards.
Backwards, yes.
And I was looking at it from myself from the 40s,
Yes.
the 50s. And Nixon then effectively used television all during the Eisenhower administration.
Yeah.
And denouncing the Korean War and backing up McCarthy.
That's
and,
right.
okay, communism is the great evil.
Yeah.
Every time America's lost, what are
Yes,
we going to do in
that's right.
Korea?
Eisenhower was very bad on TV. He was very self-conscious.
Was too honest, too honest.
Well, he didn't know how to use a
He was not a demagogue.
No, he didn't know how to read a speech. He stuttered.
Right.
He would fumble for words.
Right.
He was nervous. I mean, clearly he was very nervous.
Right.
And he just couldn't project.
Right.
Now Nixon had got it down pretty good.
Right.
He knew how to manipulate it.
Right, and he was manipulating
Right.
for Democrats, lost Congress,
Right, and I
lost China, and
Exactly.
Alger-Hiss, and so
Uh-huh.
and he. Okay, so 52, Nixon's career is going up.
That's right. Yep.
Only in 1960, when Eisenhower retires, Nixon had a little bit of a loss because he wanted the endorsement of Eisenhower. And one of the strange things is that Eisenhower, being an old man, retired and gave that speech on the military-industrial
Industrial
complex.
complex.
He goes out as a dove
Yeah.
and wouldn't give Nixon the endorsement.
Nope.
So Nixon had to run for himself. That was one thing that Nixon lost. Eisenhower personally didn't trust him.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't endorse him on TV. He didn't endorse him at the convention.
That was a little.
He walked away.
Yeah.
I'm going back to Gettysburg.
But the public opinion forgot that.
Yeah.
Nixon started talking about Kennedy and the arms race and Red China and would there be a nuclear war? And Nixon had a tie, really, in those Kennedy-Nixon debates. And Nixon had 5 o'clock shadow, but that was a minor point.
Yeah, I don't think that had
The
any.
real thing is, from my point of view, they both came off as hawks. They were both trying to over-trump the other. Who's going to use the nuclear bomb first?
Yeah.
I'm a better anti-communist than you are.
Yeah.
And Kennedy was talking about the missile gap and so
Sure.
forth and so on. So Kennedy barely won that election, 10,000 votes. And Nixon came close.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah. And well, anyway, that's off the point. Getting back to Nixon's career then. When the Vietnam War opens, Nixon is back in the saddle again because we have the anti-communist crusade.
That's right. Yeah.
And he could bring out all of the cliches of the 50s and back Johnson's war, and then Nixon inherited that war, and then he kept it going for 4 years. And both Nixon and Johnson then had to defend the 17th parallel in Vietnam and were responsible for the continuation of that war. And then McGovern was a college professor who was in a Pisa, and he's not qualified to be
he's
president.
too weak. Yeah.
And Nixon then won the popular through Buckley, through J. Edgar Hoover, through the media, constant. See, Cronkite was a kind of a centrist, a moderate.
Yeah.
He was not always for the Republicans or the Democrats. He had a reputation of telling it like it is.
Yeah.
And he came across in the beginning being a hawk in Vietnam.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And it wasn't until Tet that he
Yeah.
decided he's going to have to get off
Complete
this.
flip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I'll never forget that
yeah,
on TV when he
so
flipped over.
Nixon was riding high for his election. So I guess we are ready now for how did the Watergate crisis
Now, how'd the scandal begin?
begin, unless we want to say anything more about Nixon's rise up to January '73. That's where we are chronologically.
No, I think you summed it up. He's pretty much of a political opportunist who saw a way to get ahead, and he took it. And
Was a good right-wing propagandist.
right.
He knew how to use
Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover and
But in terms of any
Buckley. And Pat Buchanan was another one. Joe McCarthy.
Yeah. But there was no real political ideologue there. There was really nothing. It
No,
was just,
he really didn't care about foreign affairs.
No.
It was just opportunism.
no. And frankly, I think if he could have won as a Democrat, he'd have done that if he thought he could get away with it.
Well, he was probably always a middle-class grocer's son who was interested in the money, and then he began to hate the New York Times and the Washington Post. That began with with Tricky Dick and continued on through the Kennedy administration.
Yeah.
So no, I don't
Okay,
think he ever become a. But anyway,
Well, let's get to here with this Watergate thing. Now, just what exactly is a Watergate? Well,
it's a hotel
So we have, and where is this hotel located?
in downtown Washington. You've been to Washington?
Oh, yes.
You go down by the river, down by the Memorial Bridge, and you go right along there, and everybody can see the water. It's right down what they call the Kennedy Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have this nice
Huge hotel.
Huge hotel in the middle of Washington, D.C., and a scandal breaks out. Now, what kind of scandal are we talking about?
Well, the problem was that McGovern knew it was a scandal back in June and July of '72.
Well, what caused the scandal?
Well, McGovern read in the newspaper, in the Washington Post, that there had been some burglars who had raided the Watergate Hotel, the office of Larry O'Brien, the head of the Democratic National Committee.
Okay.
Well, McGovern was fighting with all of those Democratic delegates, and the delegates were particularly against McGovern, and the Muskie delegates and the Wallace delegates,
Right.
and the Scoop Jackson delegates
Yep.
and the Humphrey delegates were thinking of trying to block McGovern through the delegates, and they wouldn't listen to McGovern. They said, "Well, this is just another Washington scandal. This is not going to get any no. This is not. This is just bad news. Forget
Right,
about it."
right.
So no one would pay any attention. And the Washington Post played it on third page. It was on the city page. There's nothing big there.
Yeah.
So and Nixon went forward. So it got no story and no headlines at the time, except in the city.
Right.
Now Woodward and Bernstein picked that up, and they make a career out of this.
Yeah, right.
But they couldn't do it before the November election.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, I actually can recall when I was watching the Democrat convention on TV, when that
You can recall that.
when that story broke, and McGovern walking out of a room just looking madder than hell.
Of course, nobody paid attention.
No one was, and they were just basically, well, there's really nothing here. I mean, so what?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not really paying a whole lot of attention, but for some reason it stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
that maybe some,
Well, after the impeachment, you kind of go back to that
Yeah,
and say,
right,
I do remember that.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But,
So anyway.
well, okay, so who are these?
Okay, so let's get back to the 17th of June. The
Okay.
17th of June, which was the second break-in, which was the one that was reported, the Washington Post says that, which the McGovern story they had read, is that there were some burglars who went into this hotel, and there were 4 or 5 of them, and they were caught. They were caught by the janitor, and they were going to be investigated for what Nixon called a third-rate burglary. You know, it wasn't going to make the headlines. Okay.
right,
Now, the reason why this was the second is that they went in May, actually, and they tried to put a bug on Larry O'Brien's telephone in order to sabotage his campaign. But the bug didn't work, so they had to go back a second time to make the bug work. And they put a tape on the door so they could get in and put the bug in and come out. And McCord was out there with a walkie-talkie, seeing that nobody would catch him.
yeah,
But anyway, the night watchman caught him,
okay,
and they were reported to the city police.
okay,
So 5 burglars are caught, and Sirica is the judge and says, well, we're going to have to investigate this and find out what this was all about. So let me see. So in January of June of 72, we have this second break-in. 5 burglars were caught, and on June 17th, the burglary was necessary to be investigated. Now, what do I want to say here? How was this burglary planned? Who planned it and why? This goes back to January of 72,
Right.
at the beginning of the campaign. And G. Gordon Liddy, who was an ex-FBI agent, hired ex-CIA agents, mostly Cuban volunteers, who were bitter about the Bay of Pigs and Kennedy, and these guys were hired for the Nixon re-election campaign. The Committee for the Re-election of the President, which abbreviated is called CREEP.
CREEP,
Which
yes.
was a stupid abbreviation, but the Democrats really exposed that.
yes, yeah, they were all agents of creep. Yeah.
But that didn't come out at the time. And Sirica didn't know anything about that. But he did discover that McCord was somehow involved with the re-election of Nixon. And he then held a trial. And what was the FBI and the CIA doing in this Watergate hotel? Because according to the Defense Act of 1947, the FBI had a monopoly of spy work in the United States.
Right,
And the CIA could only do spy work abroad in foreign countries.
correct.
So Nixon must be, or the Nixon administration, or somebody must be violating the National Defense Act of 1947. You're not supposed to do this.
Right.
But of course, if the FBI is secret and the CIA is secret, spies can do a lot of damage without anybody getting caught. Okay. So that's the question that Sirica is going to have to investigate. Was there anybody higher than these 5 people in the White House that was behind McCord and these 5 agents? So the next question is, how did the Watergate hotel scandal reveal itself to me? Because I was not as sophisticated as you. My mind was so dedicated to ending the war that I saw it as a third-rate burglary and didn't pay any attention to it.
Right.
When Sirica began his trial. It took me a long time to catch on what Sirica was doing.
Right.
It didn't become national news overnight.
No, it didn't. And the other thing about the trial, the way I remember, it wasn't a particularly long trial. Basically, everyone pled guilty.
Yeah, that was no problem.
Well, and of course, they were told to plead guilty. The idea was, get it over with,
Right.
get it off the front page,
Right.
and things were going to be great.
Right. So in January of '73, this key date that we've been talking about, and Nixon's at the height of his career. Sirica begins the trial, and he indicts 5 burglaries. Okay, and the question is, what is the chain of command? That's the unknown question. So anyway, they pleaded guilty, and the problem is the FBI and the CIA must be violating the Fourth Amendment, which says you have to get a warrant. These guys didn't have a warrant.
No.
Now, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had spied on American communists, and nobody cared. And he spied on blacks like Martin Luther King,
right.
and nobody cared. But J. Edgar Hoover was cautious enough only to take on 4 bigwigs. He took on Eleanor Roosevelt. He took on Harry Truman. And both Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt hated FBI for doing that. But FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had tremendous support in Congress to get reappointed. He had a little scandal sheet on everybody in Congress.
Oh, absolutely.
Who's committing adultery? Who's involved in homosexuality? Who's drunk? Every time the appropriations came up, FBI, 100%, you got the money.
Yeah.
You can be reappointed. He was over 70, he was still being reappointed.
Yeah.
Now, for Nixon's tragic twist, he died of a natural death in May of '72.
Yeah. What a shame.
Well, it was a decisive moment when Brennan was suddenly trying to assassinate Nixon. Was there a connection there? When Muskie drops out of the race and McGovern becomes the candidate, these are still unexplored questions. There's still a lot of evidence out there that hasn't been dug out of the CIA files and the FBI files.
Right.
But anyway, Nixon was being exceedingly venturesome by hiring CIA people. And FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, before he died, warned Nixon through a guy by the name of Houston, who's going to be his successor.
Yeah.
Don't get involved with the CIA. It'll lead to trouble. And Nixon was later understood that
Right.
that was a fatal mistake.
Exactly.
But he didn't know it would ever come out.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot to be revealed here in this Sirica investigation. So anything more I want to say about that? Hoover died. I guess I've covered that. Now Mitchell's involved because
Now, who is Mitchell?
he's the Attorney General.
Okay, John Mitchell.
And he has to resign as the Attorney General to take over the committee for re-election.
So he becomes head of CREEP.
He becomes the head of CREEP. and Liddy and McCord are working for CREEP. They're not working for the White House officially.
Okay, so you have G. Gordon Liddy, ex-CIA, complete and total fascist, unapologetic.
If that's an opinion you have, and I don't disagree.
No, that's the opinion that he said about himself in his own
But he got
biography.
20 years because he would never confess to anything.
Well, no, of course not.
He put his hand over a flame and said, you can torture me, but I'm not going to say a word about this. I'm loyal to Nixon.
As if he really had anything to...
He was an actor, if there ever was one.
Yeah, very dramatic. Yeah, I'm sorry, you're a two-bit hood who got caught. So there's no big thing here.
But Liddy's very... We gotta have to stop. Probably.
Okay, we got
But
two.
anyway, Liddy was important for setting up McCord and these agents, and he set the plan. He wrote out in longhand the plan for the Watergate hotel. Not Nixon himself.
No.
Nixon himself didn't.
No, he was isolated off from it.
Yeah,
I
right.
understand it.
So I guess I'll have to stop here.
Yep.
And you can have 2 minutes for summary, and we can continue this trial next time.
Okay. Well, to summarize, we've looked over Richard Nixon's rise and the beginning of his fall in politics. We went from the start in 1946 in California, and we're up to 1973. He's been reelected by an overwhelming majority of Americans. He carried 49 states out of 50. He's ending the war in Vietnam. Henry Kissinger is establishing diplomatic relations with other powers.
Right.
And if things had carried on that way, the Nixon administration might have ended 4 years later on a note of great accomplishments.
Right.
But what we're seeing here is that, and what we really haven't explored is probably a man who was so, I hate to use the word paranoid, about his enemies, that he had to employ really very criminal means to make sure that they...
Yeah, there were a lot of people in the creep organization.
Right.
And that's where Hunt got involved.
Yeah.
Wasn't he the guy who had the automobile?
Yeah, Hunt, yeah.
He was going to assassinate people by having a fake automobile
Well,
accident?
that was one of the thoughts, or kidnapping, taken to Mexico. That was supposed to happen with some of McGovern's supporters. They would be
And then there were a lot of
taken out.
journalists who began to denounce Nixon, saying, I'm proud to be on his enemies list.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's after Nixon was pretty well going downhill.
Then it
After
became
the
safer.
Irvin Committee and
Sure.
after Sirica had brought out a lot of investigation.
Okay.
But there's a long year between January
yeah.
and October of '73. That's the next big
That's right.
turning point, and
Well,
we'll have to do that
We'll
next
have
time.
to end it here. So it's been a pleasure as usual.
Okay,
And,
thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
We see history through two different eyes.
Absolutely.
I see it from backwards, forwards, occasionally backwards, but you started as a younger man. How old were you at that time?
Well, let's see.
In 73?
73. I've been about 21,
You were 21.
21, 22.
Yeah, well, I was 43.
Uh-huh.
I was 42 when I ran for Congress.
That's right.
73 when I was still teaching, recovering from the Vietnam War tragedy.
Okay, I guess we'll end it there.
Okay.
We'll do her again.